Kia ora, Te Pūoho Kātene. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss the state of sustainable finance in Aotearoa. Could you start by introducing yourself and a little bit about your organisation?
Sure thing. Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko whitirei e te maunga, ko ngātai parirua te moana, ko kāpiti te mautere, ko toa rangatira te tupuna, ko toa rangatira te whare, ko Ngāti toa te iwi, ko te rauparaha te tangata. My name is Te Pūoho Kātene. I hail from the Ngāti toa, Ngāti tama, and Ngāti Whātua tribes. And for my part, I'm the Kaihautū, or the Executive Director for Te Pūtea Whakatupu Trust. Now, we are a Māori philanthropic trust that pursues our purpose of the sustenance of Māori identity. And we do that through leadership development, education and training, as well as supporting Western and traditional knowledge systems for Māori on a national focus.
Okay, so the Sustainable Finance Forum roadmap talks about the importance for governance of long-term thinking and being clear about social and environmental purpose. What's your view on that, given that kind of unique perspective you have?
Absolutely, we would say, e hāngai puana hau ki tērā kōrero. I hold very strongly to this idea of intergenerational thinking. It is my solemn hope that that long-term thinking characterizes the post-COVID Aotearoa economy that we choose to create. In particular, I hearken back to the idea that we today in the present are the fruits of 1,000 years of adventurers and philanthropes and entrepreneurs and innovators and creators. And when I think of that legacy that was left for us, indicating how we should act on a day-to-day basis, it is our obligation to understand that we are the new ancestors for the generations to come, and we must act accordingly. Now, that is both in terms of a cultural position, but more and more in terms of how we bring those cultural and economic and commercial lenses together to make sure that when we operate as good ancestors in business as well as in our societies.
So can you tell me a bit more then about Te Pūtea Whakatupu Trust Future Māori Governance Program and how that incorporates that kind of concept of long-term thinking of being a good ancestor?
Absolutely. So our Future Māori Governance Program, which we call Tukutuku Koiora, is primarily focused on creating the next wave of tikanga-led and future-focused governors. Now, being tikanga-led means whatever governance space one might enter, we do it with our intergenerational values as our foundation. And by connecting our aspiring or our accelerating Māori governors to their tikanga or their customs as a core part of their ancestral legacy, we innately connect them to what it means to be a good ancestor. And the understanding that as the new ancestors for the generations to come, we must act accordingly around the board table as well as in our own personal lives. Now, having an intergenerational view is fundamental for the governance paradigm to which we aspire, but it's also incomplete. It's like dropping a pin on Google Maps. It doesn't mean anything unless we have the signposts and the milestones that show us we're heading in the right direction. And that's where the technical training within the program comes in. So by leading with these shared values to act as the scaffolding on which to build the array of technical and strategic expertise that follows, our goal is to make intergenerational thinking ubiquitous across industries and sectors. And by providing technical training and skills within the intergenerational context, that's the way we connect those intergenerational horizons to the practical role of governance, how to govern risk, organizational oversight, sound financial planning, and leading strategic conversations across different time horizons.
Just wondering if you could give me an example of how that intergenerational lens might lead you to make a different decision, a different strategic decision than if you didn't have it.
Sure. Well, if I consider Western best practice for telling me how to make a commercial investment, the standard discounted cash flow methodology would tell me that $1 that I earn today is worth more than $1 I earn in a year's time from now. cash is king, sooner is better, and so on and so forth. When I task myself as a tikanga-led governor to make mokopuna decisions, that is, decisions with my grandchildren at their heart, making mokopuna decisions tells me I need to prioritize making $1 for my mokopuna, my grandchildren, over $1 for myself. And so there is an existing dissonance between what value speaks to when I'm looking at it from one lens to another. And so when we're talking about being tikanga-led, it's about not operating and straddling both worlds. It's about bringing those worlds together so that we can walk confidently in a single world which we create.
Okay, so what developments or trends have you seen in the past, 12 to 18 months in Aotearoa and beyond around this approach to governance?
Sure. Now, through a number of different fora, it's become clear to me that while our intergenerational view is driven by Māori tikanga and values, more and more this is a space that is growing as a shared value proposition across the wider Aotearoa governance space. I look internationally and we can see the power of the shareholder and the stakeholder and consumer activism really starting to shine through. Of particular note recently is the ownership of the international $3 billion Patagonia being donated into a trust aimed at fighting climate change. I think of Larry Fink from BlackRock in consecutive years advocating for a focus shift away from the Friedman model of maximizing shareholder value to repositioning as focusing on stakeholder value. Now, this international lens has been buttressed by developments in our own whenua, not the least of which coincides with Te Ohanga Māori, the Māori economy, growing at double the rate of the New Zealand economy. Now, that the growing frequency I think we've seen on the ground in terms of climate-related weather events has really driven home that this is not a next generation issue. This is an all generations issue in the here and the now. I live in Turanganui-a-Kiwa, Gisborne, and in the last 8 months, we have had 3 50-year rain events and washed out all of the roads going up the coast. It is not an abstract cost that we are paying for climate change. It is a tangible, real cost in the present. And doing well as businesses, as governors, does not have to come at the expense of doing good. And I think we've seen as the increasing frequency of green bond issuance in Aotearoa, including the repeat issuance by the likes of Argosis, as a clear sign of the incremental mainstreaming of impact capital. And whilst I think we need to see an increase in the appetite for longer tenors of our deals to increase the alignment with our intergenerational goals, I think there's a growing acceptance of socially and environmentally motivated capital, as well as the absolute growth of responsible assets under management, which is a very promising sign.
So those are all the drivers. What about the kind of handbrakes, if you like? What's holding back or challenging progress in this area?
Sure. And I certainly think stepping back, and I am ever the optimist, and it's always dangerous to be caught too much in your own optimism. Responsible assets under management globally is still a rounding error compared to the socially neutral capital at play. And I think in Aotearoa, even though there is a delta, a shift that we're experiencing, I think there's still a dissonance between those long-term intergenerational outcomes and making business decisions today. And seeing those long-term outcomes as nice to haves rather than mission critical, a vitamin rather than a painkiller, you might say. The ability to, the evaluative and reporting cadence for financial outputs is eminently understood. And inherent in them lies their own incentive systems, which pushes and pulls on our actors, whether consciously or subconsciously. And the lack of clarity around how we evaluate and measure our intergenerational outcomes and the social impact that it encapsulates or it creates remains a major driver of that dissonance that we cannot report or evaluate within the same ballpark, if you will, of how we do business within our current system from a day-to-day basis.
So what do you think would actually shift the dial on this? What do you see as the kind of key next steps?
Well, I think that there's a lot of promising progress being made in different areas to help with this. The XRB's work on developing climate-related financial disclosures, as well as the ongoing efforts of the government to develop further granularity as to how the living standards framework captures and incentivizes more impact-focused long-term thinking in situ, is a good example of that. Particularly with the ongoing pressures faced due to rising inflation and the effect on the cost of capital at play, increasing the mechanisms by which governors and trustees can understand and price risk in making our determinations around the board table will be crucial for governors to make good ancestral decisions.
Any final thoughts then on the overall state of sustainable finance in Aotearoa and what's needed to lift momentum in 2023?
I am forever sanguine in the direction that we are taking in terms of our post-COVID Aotearoa economy. A lot of the rhetoric that we heard was around building back better, but there's a key fundamental fallacy in that, and that building back to what was is not better. We need to build that post-COVID Aotearoa economy to which we aspire, one that puts people at the center of our decision-making, one that gives due deference to the environment and considers the outcomes for our future generations, as well as for the existing and current populations and societies we serve. And I think as we instill those principles into the heart of how we as New Zealanders do business, we will more and more be calling on innovative frameworks and resources to make sure that we can not only have that distant pin dropped on a Google map towards the future that we wish to manifest for our future generations, but that we are able to understand and design the signposts and the milestones along the way. And it's incumbent on all of us in our roles as governors to make sure that we can have meaningful input to how those signposts are designed, and then to heed them on a day-to-day basis to make our ancestral decisions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Te Pūoho Kātene.